Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for Business Bootcamps for Writers with the Authors Guild Foundation and today's topic, Marketing for Indie Authors. I'd like to say thank you to the National Endowment for the Arts, Penguin Random House, and all our donors for supporting us and, and allowing us to offer these programs free to the public. Any writers out there who are not members of the Authors Guild, please check out authorsguild.org to learn more about what we do. So today we're here to learn about marketing your books and yourself as an indie author. I'm sure all authors can learn plenty from today, but I wanted to also mention that we'll have another marketing webinar in January for traditionally published authors, the author's role in working with marketing in that sense. So look forward to that as well. And now we'll go ahead and turn it over to our moderator, Jane Friedman. Jane has nearly 25 years of experience in the publishing industry. She writes and publishes the Hot Sheet, an industry newsletter for authors, and we're delighted as ever to have her moderating today's event. Audience members, please use the Q&A box below to submit questions at any time during today's talk. We'll get to as many as we can. Apologies if we don't answer your question. And there's also closed captions available to help you follow along. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jane, and our panelists. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Johnny. So I'm going to offer some brief introductions of our panelists today, and then we're going to dive right into the questions that were pre-submitted. Nicholas Eric is a science fiction and fantasy novelist who's written over 20 novels, and I especially love his comprehensive guides on book marketing, which I've been following for some years now, and I consider him a leading expert on advertising for self-published authors and really for anyone who's going to be advertising, which we will talk a lot about in the next hour. We have Pamela M. Kelly, who is a USA Today and Wall Street Journal best-selling author of women's fiction, family sagas, and mystery suspense. Pamela, I noticed you have a really impressive profile at BookBub. People attending should check it out, and I hope that will come up in our discussion today. Michael Lebron is the author of over 60 science fiction and fantasy books and also writes books for writers. And I know him partly because of his excellent work for the Alliance of Independent Authors, where he is the outreach manager. And Susan K. Quinn has been self-publishing since the halcyon days of 2011. She writes speculative fiction and also sexy romance under a pen name, and she runs Indies Together, a 1,200 plus member group of self-published authors. So we have such a wealth of expertise and experience here today. I'm really excited about this conversation. And the topic we received the most questions about by far, paid advertising, like Facebook ads, Amazon ads, and all the other places one can advertise. Now we're going to get to that. But first, I feel like we need to discuss the importance of getting the book itself right, because if your cover is off, if your book description is bad, your marketing and promotion and paid advertising isn't going to work that well. So Susan, I'm hoping that you can start us off here and talk about those mistakes one can make from the outset that can undercut your ability to effectively market and promote. And then we'll jump over to anyone else who wants to add their 2 cents.
Great. First, thank you for having me on the panel today. It's always a pleasure to help other fellow authors. It's kind of one of the pleasures of being an indie publisher. You're absolutely right that you need to have a solid cover, some solid descriptions for your book. A lot of people, when they're first starting out, try to DIY a lot of that and have some ideas like, well, my cover has to represent my story, so I'm going to pick this scene from the story and put it on the cover. And it's like, no. First of all, you need a professional who understands design. And you also need to understand the genre. When you really need to understand is your audience. And what the cover does, what the marketing copy does, what the description does, all of it is just telling the reader 2 things. First of all, what genre did I just parachute into? And 2, are you going to give me a good time here? Because I want something to intrigue me or to promise me that friends to lovers trope that I love, or here's a new science fiction premise that I've never heard before and sounds like all I have to do is hear one piece of it, and now I can imagine all these things that could happen. So the intrigue has to be there. And to put all that together in a professional way, you really need to understand what your genre is about, what your readers are about. And a lot of people think that's a mystery, or they think that it's just like them. So they think they are the prototypical reader, and you are by definition not. You are a writer. You are way into this in a different kind of way than your readers are. And so you need to understand by looking at what's on the charts. Look what's selling, look what they're giving to readers, because we are entertainers, not just artists. At least if you want to sell books, you need to entertain as well as make your art. And those two can go together, and they don't have to go together. So that's a choice as well. So that's my initial pitch. I'm not sure who wants to go next.
Yeah. Pamela, would you like to jump in here?
Can you remind me again what the question is, how you phrased it? Just want to make sure I focus right.
Sure. So the question is, before you even think of investing money in paid advertising, one should ensure that the book itself has the right cover, has the right description, and there are probably some other things that you need to get right in order for marketing and promotion to work. So the question is, do you see some authors, indie authors, undercutting themselves before they even get started? And so Susan has pointed to, cover design, of course.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's probably the one area where a lot of indies probably cut corners. And I was laughing when you said about literally making the cover, representative of the book, because I think everybody's done that to some degree when they start out. But I think the cover just has to convey the feeling of this, what kind of a book is it? You should know at a glance, this is women's fiction or this is fantasy. So yeah, I think you have to get that. But I think that before you really invest much money in marketing, the better the book, the easier it's going to be to market the book. So I think if you, especially if it's a first book, if you can do a developmental edit, or if you can't afford to do that, have some beta readers that really know your genre. Make sure that if you're writing a romance that's, say, like a Harlequin type romance, like I did, my first book was a marriage of convenience romance. And I wanted to make sure that I hit all the beats. So I hired a developmental editor that had been with Harlequin for years, and now she was doing editing on the side. So she read the book for me, and then she actually sent me a revision letter. And it basically, I wanted to know, was I hitting all the beats? I've read the books, I know the genre really well, but did it translate to the page? And so she sent me a letter and she pointed out where I did and, where I missed, a challenge for me for years was I had a hard time with conflict. I just wanted everybody to get along. And she's like, no, you need to deepen the conflict, or this was a little bit confusing. So I had about 4 pages of notes and I was completely like, oh my gosh, it was a lot to digest that, but then I digested it. I spent like a week or two going through and making the changes. And then she read through it again. And then I went ahead and I released it. And I felt better about marketing the book because I had somebody that gave the green light that said, yes, you've hit the beat you're supposed to hit. And I think that makes a big difference before you spend any money on marketing at all.
Hey, Jane, can I jump in?
Please do.
I would say, I would echo everything that's been said before. I would say there's the holy triumvirate in terms of marketing, which is your book description, your book cover, and the opening sample of your book. And I think when we say, you want a book cover that's on brand to genre, sometimes that's hard to understand what that means. And what I've learned over the years is that a book cover is really just a series of signals. And you can break a book cover down to its components. So what are other best-selling authors in your subgenre doing with the author name? What are they doing with the title? What is in the foreground? What is in the background? And if you break it down like that, then you can really start to engineer and reverse engineer what a best-selling cover looks like and give those instructions to your cover designer. And it's the same thing with a book description. If you look at best-selling book descriptions, probably 8 out of 10 of them are going to have a headline, and it's probably going to be in bold. So that's the first part. And then there's a lead in, and then there's a call to action. And so if you can just study that and break things down as an aspiring author, that just makes things easier to consume, and it makes them easier to replicate.
Thank you,
Liz
Michael.
hasn't had a chance yet, but I wanted to jump in and add on to what Michael was saying. All of that is totally spot on. And sometimes people don't feel like they can study the genre. You can absolutely study the genre. Go on Amazon, it's free. Just look at what's up there and be a study of your genre. But also once you do that, it doesn't stay the same. I've been in this business for 10 years, and I will tell you that like sometimes it moves really, really fast, but definitely every year or 2 years, the style of descriptions changes, the style of covers changes. So you really have to be sort of a perpetual student of what is out there, what is happening. I like I said, I've been in this for a while and I fall down on this. I don't always get back out there and go, wait a minute, now I need to go, get my ground truth again about what actually is happening in the industry. So learning that skill is one you're going to keep using. So definitely, that's what I'm going to say.
Well, that segues really well into a question I have specifically for Nick, because if I'm not mistaken, you've used pre-order advertising or just early advertising as a way to test market some of these things, whether it's the cover or the book description, the positioning. Can you describe some of the work that you've done here or what you would recommend for authors?
Sure. And first thing I would recommend is just look at the genre lists, like has been mentioned already, look at those top 100 lists. But to test a cover or a book description, you can do that on Facebook. You can test the cover via BookBub ads. So what you do is you have 2 identical ads, except for the element that you're testing. So for example, if you're testing the cover, you just have everything the same, except for that cover image on the cover background, which you can get from the designer. And you can request this image from your designer if you're not great with Photoshop or Canva or something like that. And then you can test them against each other. So same audience, same everything in terms of the headline, all the settings are the same. And then that isolates which cover is better. And you can apply that to anything you want to test, whether it's say a tagline or a blurb, any component of your book. So this is really useful in that sometimes you have a cover that looks like it's on genre or it's professional, but it doesn't necessarily resonate as well as another cover. And what you can do is on Facebook, you're looking for about 50 plus clicks per cover variant. I would probably go 100 plus clicks. Depending on the genre, that's going to cost you $30 to $50. So if you're testing 2 covers, then it's about $100. It's one of the best investments you can make. And it also has the benefit of getting you acquainted with the ads platforms. So it's probably not the very first thing that I would start with on the ads platforms, because you do need a little bit of a foundation there. But once you're comfortable with something like Facebook or BookBub, it's a way that you can get a tremendous amount of value for very little money. And I mentioned the blurb. People generally don't like writing blurbs, so this suggestion may not be appealing to people, but the blurbs are free to write. So you can test 5, 10, 15, 20 different blurbs potentially for your book. And those are all free. You need about maybe 30 clicks on Facebook. You can't really test them on BookBub ads, but 30 clicks per blurb, you get tremendous feedback on what your market is resonating with. And you can test 5 blurbs for $50, $100. And the description, because people are readers, has such an impact on your sales. Probably at the end of the day, it has a bigger impact than the cover once people are on the page. So the cover draws people to the page, it draws people to your ad, but that description is what is going to make them, in marketing parlance, convert and either borrow the book in Kindle Unlimited or buy a copy.
Excellent. And just for clarification, when Nick's talking about blurbs, he means book descriptions. I know some people think of blurbs as those fancy quotes you get from famous authors. We're talking about book descriptions that you write for like the Amazon page or the back cover of the book. I'll also add, I have found that this requires some investment, but I've found that K-Lytics reports is a decent shortcut for figuring out what covers look like currently in your genre or subcategory. So K-Lytics does like reports every year or so on mystery, thriller, suspense, on science fiction, fantasy, on young adults, on romance, and lots of different other subgenres. And so he'll create a map of the top 100 covers, and then he'll have an Excel file with all of the book descriptions from those top 100 books. So it kind of cuts down on the research time and gives you a quick glance at what's working, although it is just for like the really top selling books. Okay, so moving on, and we will circle back to advertising. I want to talk about metadata. So authors and publishers alike are counseled to pay a lot of attention to this. So metadata it's stuff like your Amazon categories and keywords. It includes your book description and all of that stuff that's behind the scenes that you enter into systems about your book. So this helps ensure that your book comes up in appropriate searches or in appropriate categories. And there are lots of paid tools out there like K-Lytics, Publisher Rocket, KD Spy, that help authors with this to some extent. Now, I want to go back to Nick again, because I know you've been actually critical of some of these paid tools, and I don't want you to necessarily come out criticizing them, but I think what I like about your approach is that you've offered tips for people on how to accomplish that research without having to pay in kind of a very logical work process. So, but you don't necessarily have to get into the weeds of that here today, but can you explain how much this metadata, the categories and the keywords, matters to sales and marketing, and how important it is to get this right?
I think it's pretty overrated on Amazon. I think it's an area where a lot of people spend a ton of time when they should be focused, number one, on the craft, and then number two, on the packaging elements, which the other panelists had a number of great suggestions about. So I spend a ton of time going down the keyword rabbit hole, using a variety of tools, adding books to, you can have up to 10 categories as an indie author on Amazon, but that's not going to move the needle as much as investing time and energy in things that are really going to pay long-term dividends. Even if you find some sort of keyword trick that works, usually it's going to change within a few months or a year because other authors are going to find out about it, then the efficacy decreases significantly. So I would really focus on craft and packaging as my two focal points for marketing and trying to build a long-term career, rather than these things that are built on quicksand. With categories in particular, I think people need to be cautious about maxing out, quote unquote, their categories. So a lot of people try to get it into all 10 of the categories because you can have up to 10. Most books don't really lend themselves to that number of categories. Maybe there are 4 or 5 that fit, and you can select 2 from the dashboard, and then you can email the Kindle Direct Publishing support and request more. But what misclassifying your book does is it makes it more difficult to run ads. It makes it more difficult for Amazon to figure out where it should recommend the book. So it actually ends up hurting you for more effort. And the same applies on a lesser scale to the keywords that you enter. I wouldn't enter a lot of unrelated things. For example, I write urban fantasy, so putting in something like vampires or urban fantasy makes sense, whereas putting in science fiction or historical fiction or whatever to try to broaden my scope, or whatever the rationale behind that would be ineffective. So I think it's much more important to just focus on the fundamentals. And once you have that craft in place, once you have that packaging solidly established, then maybe I would think about something like advertising as the third step, rather than really trying to navigate the categories and keywords and wring out a few extra sales from them.
Great. Is there anyone else who would like to jump in on the metadata issue? Anything you've learned about categories and keywords that you think? Yeah, Pamela, did I see you read?
Yeah, just one thing to add quick. I agree. I totally agree with Nick. I mean, I think the worst thing you can do is to have categories that are not relevant to your book. But there is a tool that makes things, and it's free, that makes things super easy. It's called Blink. I think it's BLNK. I'll find the link and post it somewhere, but it's a fantastic tool, and you put your ASIN into it and it pulls up your book, and it shows you all of your existing Kindle categories and all of your existing book categories. And then what's really helpful is you can take someone you know that's a good comp. So for me, it might be Ellen Hildebrand, for instance. I'll put an ASIN of one of her books in there, and then it'll pull up all of the categories that she's in. And then what this thing does is it just gives you other ideas for categories that you might have not thought of. And Amazon's always adding new categories. And there was one that I discovered, I saw in a friend's book a few months ago, Later in Life. And I'm like, oh, what's this? Later in Life romance? Well, a lot of my characters are in their 50s or even 60s. And I'm like, that could work for me. So I added that to my book. And so I don't think you should have a lot of, manipulating with categories. But one thing I do think is helpful is if you are in some smaller categories that are relevant to your book, as well as bigger categories, you can use those smaller categories to kind of stair step your way into the bigger categories, because every category has a parent category, like romance, and I think this Later in Life falls into romance, might be contemporary romance. So if you rank well in that one, you might be more visible and then find yourself ranking better in the next parent category. And it can just help your advertising efforts too. So it's just, I think it kind of all works together. So it's something I try to pay attention to. Oh, thank you, Nicholas.
I wanted to add, I totally agree that metadata is overrated. And I think what authors are looking for is a secret hack, right? They're looking for, well, if I just change this category to that category, then all of a sudden the sales will suddenly appear, and it doesn't work that way. But what I will say that authors often don't think of is that each of the retailers actually acts different or works differently. So in terms of how readers find their works, now most readers will find books by asking a friend or seeing it somewhere or something like that. Or they've just read that author before, so they're reading them again. But each of the retailers will have a different and often several different ways that it enables or helps readers find their next book. So Google is huge on search category, or not categories, but search terms. Everything is driven by search. So having a good description that really pings on a bunch of keywords is actually really helpful in Google. That will not help you at all on Kobo, because Kobo's search engine is terrible. And so the way that Kobo helps readers connect is they have all this behind the scenes algorithms connections. They send out newsletters to readers, and they say, hey, they do a lot of recommendations like, hey, you read this, so we recommend, like Netflix style, read these 5 other books. So understanding each retailer is actually important. And I really encourage authors to download the app, use the app, use each of the retailers to understand how it works from a reader perspective. And that can help you understand now, I want to title my book in a certain way because it shows up differently on Amazon as it does on Apple. And so that will change how you will present that same image. You've got this great package that you put together, you've tested your covers, you've got this great description, but how do you actually show up on the page? And that actual, storefront for each of the retailers is different. So spend, rather than worrying so much about the keywords, get those, like Nicholas said, make it, accurate. Like Pamela said, make it actually mean something for your book, but also make sure that visually you're showing up for the reader. So.
All right, so let's talk about paid advertising specifically. And this is where, as I said, we received the most questions, very general questions like, do ads even work? To very specific, like, do Facebook ads work for middle grade fiction? So, I think it's safe to say, yes, ads do work, but it's easy to lose money on them. And for authors focused on Amazon, I'll just mention that the 2 platforms that seem to come up most often are Amazon itself, where you can place ads if you're using KDP, and Facebook, and then maybe BookBub after that. So we'll start with what I hope is a simple question, which is, should authors be investing in ads if they only have one book? And if so, do you have a suggested platform on which to start? And the reason I start with this question is because I see advice frequently that it's tough for authors to make ads profitable, especially if they have a low-priced ebook, if readers aren't going to go on to buy more in a series, for example. So does that mean authors would be wiser to wait until they at least have 2 or 3 or more books out? And Pamela, would you like to start us off here?
Sure. Yeah, this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine, because ever since when I've started back in 2013, people said never advertise until you have 3 books. And I came from running a small business, and I knew how important marketing was to get the word out. So the way I think about it is, especially now with Amazon being so crowded, there's so many books. If you don't advertise your book, if you wait until you have 3 books, how's anybody going to find you? You know, it's like having a party and not sending out invitations. That's how I look at it. I think it's so important. But at the same time, I think people need to be smart about it. You know, you have to look at basically what can you afford to lose, you know, and you don't want to be throwing bad money after bad, you know. If you have a tiny budget, like I helped a friend that had a $50 budget and she was in Kindle Unlimited, and we worked with that. There's things you can do depending on what you have for money. We did things that cost almost nothing. So what we did was we used BookFunnel. You know, we set up, we did things that took more time than money to do. So we set up group promotions where we gave away an excerpt. But like, I think at the time we gave away the first maybe couple chapters, ending on a hook. And in the back of that, we had the link so that you could go buy the rest of the book. And then a month later, we did another promotion. This time we did a 99-cent sale where we had 15, 20 authors. Everybody did 99 cents. Everybody emailed what they had for a list. Some people had more lists than others. They posted everybody agreed to spend $20 on a Facebook ad that went to that link. So it was a coordinated effort. And that got her off to a fantastic start. You know, I recently, a couple of years ago, I shifted. It was like starting over. And on my book 1, entering a new genre, going wide from being in KU, I had this idea that I thought could work, which was I wanted to use Amazon ads, specifically targeting other wide traditional authors, traditional and wide authors, indie, traditional, didn't matter, in my niche. So my niche was, my book was on Nantucket, so I was looking at the Nancy Thayer, Ellen Hildebrand, all of those relevant authors. And then I peeled back and I looked at who was in their also bots. I made a keyword list on Amazon, and I started with, I think it's like $15 a day, and I didn't even spend that right away. You know, so I started slowly. My goal, I had a 2-week pre-order period because I knew that when you're brand new, book 1, it didn't make a lot of sense to do a long pre-order because nobody knows who you are. So same thing if you're a new author, I would do a 2-week pre-order. And the purpose of it is just to get all your ducks in a row, start getting some visibility, start getting some also bots, because I knew a lot of people don't realize how important the also bots are. And if you can get the right also bots, like if I could get into Ellen Hildebrand or into Nancy Thayer, you know, so my actual strategy was I knew I wasn't going to jump into their also bots. They were too big of an author. But I knew that I could jump into some of the indie authors that were in that niche. I could start there and you stair step your way up. And that's what I did. So, and I targeted every single book that was coming out that summer. Mary Kay Andrews had a book coming out, I think a week or 2 after me. I targeted her pre-order. I targeted all the pre-orders all summer long. And that turned out to be a fabulous strategy because whenever the book's released, I saw a bump. And so it worked really, really well. And so that gave me, I could give anybody just that awareness. And once you get into a Mary Kay Andrews also bot, you just start kind of writing. And the book basically took off, you know, and it's a strategy that worked really well. And I think it's a strategy that anybody can use in any genre, and you don't have to spend a lot of money. So, you know, people are like, oh, you have to spend thousands. You don't. I started at $15 a day, and I very carefully watched. And Amazon has this thing where if you spend all of your budget, they will email you and they're like, you spent your budget, and they'll suggest that you up it. And so they suggested I up it to $38. And of course, I was just like, no, that's crazy. I'm not going to do that. That's insane. But the book was profitable. And this is the one thing that I always say is, you want your ad to be profitable. That's my main rule with advertising is I want it to be profitable. So I said, well, I'll meet it in the middle. I'll go up to $25. So I raised it to $25. And, I didn't have a whole lot of money to play with. And I was just like, okay, hope this works. And then a couple of days went by and I got another email. Now they were saying raise it to 51. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I raised it to 38. And then I went to 51. And then I went to 100. And this is over maybe like a 2-week period. And I kind of held it there for a bit. But what it did was that basically is how you could scale an Amazon ad that's working. And the key there is the ad has to be working to scale up that way. But it basically let that book climb. It climbed into the top 100 a month after it released. And then it stayed there for about a month, which was like, that had never happened to me before. But it just goes to show that you can really, when the ads work, they can work really well. Do they always work? No. And that's the frustrating thing, so that's why you want to start with small amounts of money. And on Facebook, the same thing. You start on Facebook. I would always set up like a bunch of little ads. I would set up a bunch of like $5 and $10 ads and trying different targets or trying a different image. You always test one thing and then you kind of figure out what works and then you can scale that up a little bit. So yeah, I think it's super important, for a new author, make a plan, whatever it is, whatever you can do, whatever your budget is, do something. That's the most important thing.
So what I like about that, Pamela, is the idea of small bets. I think it's less intimidating and you learn things as you go and you can abandon things that don't work without having this huge outlay of money. Would anyone else like to jump in on this question? We are going to talk more about ads and the learning curve, but anyone else want to add in there, whether they think it's smart to start advertising right away?
I have a couple things to say. First of all, like if you just have one book, you need more books. And I tend to tell people if you haven't written 5 or 6 books, you're probably not ready to publish your first book yet. So you're just still figuring out who you are as an author often in those first few books. Everyone's, there's always an exception, but so there's that. You should write more books and you should also have more books ready to go. Like if you're debuting as an author to the world, have a whole series ready to go or something like that. Don't dip your toe in the water with this one book to see if it's going to work. Otherwise, I'm going to go be an electrical engineer instead. Like you need to have some commitment and a plan and that sort of thing. But that said, yeah, absolutely. I agree. You absolutely should be advertising your first book. You should be always advertising pretty much whenever you have books for sale. However, I have a very different approach than a lot of authors. I look at there being a couple of different kinds of advertising. The ones that get all the airtime are the Facebook ads and the AMS ads and per-click ads is what I call them. And I look at those as being in a category where you have a lot of money and potentially a lot of risk, and it takes a lot of knowledge to do it really well. So I think it can be very intimidating. And so I'm here to say you don't have to use them because I've built an entire career and I have never used them. I've dabbled a few times and tried it, and every year or so I check in and say, okay, does it still take a lot of investment of time and energy to figure out how to do this? Yes, it does. And my system is working just fine the way it is. So I don't want to do that time of investment. If you do, the one thing I would say is go get somebody who you trust to show you the ropes. And sometimes that's a paid webinar. I'll throw out Sky Warren's Facebook webinar, which I have not personally taken, but I know some really smart people who have and say it's very valuable. So, there are resources out there. There are people who know how to do these types of ads. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have to invest some time and effort to figure out how to do that. But if you don't, and you want to do a different approach, what I do is I use a lot of free. I use perma-free because I'm wide, but when I was in KU, you're also using free. And I think we're going to talk about that later. But what I would do is if I was launching a new pen name, which I actually might be doing here soon. So you're starting sort of from zero. and you're not going to you're not going to use a whole bunch of per-click ads. Well, how would you do that? Well, one strategy would be, and this is actually something I'm probably going to do in 2022 in my new pen name that I want to try, is start with something free. I think Pamela mentioned give away a few chapters, but you can also just go full in, write a prequel, write a novella-sized prequel to your real book that you're launching, and make it something that's free. Get a bunch of people coming into your system, pre-ordering, and basically building an audience by having something that's zero friction. It's free. Have your friends give it away. Network with other authors. Have them give it away to that are in a relevant genre. Have them give it away to their readers, so now they're hooked into your story and your characters. And so when your book comes out, you've got this at full price, all right? You've got this ready audience that's already had a taste of what you have to offer. And so that's one way to get started. Now, you also need to have book 2 and book 3 in the queue, and you need to have a whole plan for marketing. And at some point, start doing things like newsletter ads. Like I spend a lot of money on advertising, even though I'm not doing the per-click ads. I'm spending money on BookBub feature deals, Free Booksy, other newsletters that are newsletters for books. And it's just basically advertising for books. I think Fussy Librarian is one that a lot of people have heard of. So there are other ways to do advertising. But if you really want to take this seriously, I don't know many businesses that you can start for $1,000, which is the number I throw out there. And I say, you need about $1,000 to cover your cover, and maybe editing will be included in that, maybe not. But to get some ads and to get some exposure for the first 2 or 3 books and to get a good series started. If you don't have that money, and I know people that don't, that really are talented writers, they just don't have the money. And either you need to slowly save up and just wait and write more books, or get your friends to help you out instead, so you can do it with very, very low money. But it's not a lot of money, but it's a lot of money if you don't have it. So, there are other approaches. I think authors get scared off, I have to learn how to do Facebook ads in order to become an author. And it's like, you don't. There are other pathways here. So find the one that works for you and your lifestyle, because people need your stories.
Michael, did you want to jump in on this before we talk about the learning curve of paid ads, which is an important thing to touch on, given because Susan's right, it can be intimidating.
It can absolutely be intimidating. I would say I am a fan of the fundamentals. So if you have, let's just say, one book, it depends on what it is. Is it a standalone? Is it a series? Maybe it makes sense to try advertising just to see what happens on a small budget. But I'm of the opinion, and I guess it's a fact, a secret fact, authors just generally aren't numbers people. And advertising is a numbers game, and that scares the mess out of people, especially when it comes to Amazon ads and Facebook ads. So to me, I think if you're one of those people who are like a deer in headlights, I think that before you even have this conversation, it's about learning Microsoft Excel basics. There's plenty of free courses on YouTube. I would start there, and then you can start to have a conversation about what does that look like for me. I tend to release a few books before I do any advertising, and the reason I do that is because I find that there's also the reader equation too. There are some readers who don't want to read anything in a series until it's done. And so it depends on what the customs are for your genre. You might release a first book and throw a bunch of money in advertising at it, and no one wants to buy it because you don't have a track record yet. You could croak in the middle of writing book 2, and then you're going to leave people hanging. And I think that's real. I think that's legitimate. And so there's that. And I think it depends on your genre. But I would also say, in terms of advertising, whether you do it or don't do it, maybe that first book is an opportunity to start failing. Maybe you're going to make some mistakes. Maybe you make those mistakes during your first book. That's where you start losing your money. And then you can, as we get into the learning curve stuff, you can use that to reduce the learning curve. So there's a couple of different ways of approaching it. I think everyone on the panel has kind of encompassed a lot of them.
So let's go over to Nick to talk about the learning curve of paid ads, because I know you've taught courses on this. And in fact, I know you're doing a series right now on going through the learning curve yourself for TikTok ads, which are very popular at the moment. And we can't teach people how to run ads during this session. I wish we could. But can you offer any inspiration or advice that would help people feel like this is something they can, even if they're not a numbers person, they could actually tackle and be successful with?
Yeah, I think the suggestion to one track is important. So even just a basic Google sheet or Excel sheet, something like that, if you're not super comfortable with Excel or anything, that's okay. Just make sure that you have those numbers in there. And then some people have already spoken to just do it at a level where it's not going to hurt you or endanger your business or take away money that you need to eat or anything like that, where you don't want this stress burden on your shoulders as you're trying to learn. I think when you're getting started, you want to treat that more as tuition rather than something where you're going to see an immediate return. There's testing involved. You have to learn the ropes. So start at somewhere around $5, $10, $15 a day, whatever you're really comfortable with, and see what the numbers are telling you. If something is unprofitable at $10 a day, there's this idea that suddenly we need more money, and that if we scale that up to $50 a day or $100 a day, then that's going to be the golden ticket and it's going to suddenly be profitable. That's just going to amplify your losses. The ads get more inefficient as you scale them up. So what that means is that your cost per click goes up and your conversion, which is the number of sales that you receive, tends to go down. So they don't become magically more efficient the more you spend. At best, they're going to remain at the same level of overall efficiency typically, but usually that's going to drop. So you want to make sure that what you have is working at a small level and then invest more as it makes sense. The other recommendation that I would have is you can explore the three main platforms, which are Facebook, Amazon, and BookBub, but then I would really choose one and learn it well and be able to wield it well for your books, and then layer another one on top of it, because only having one is a risky proposition, because you can have account suspensions or the ad cost can go up or you can run into glitches. So it's useful to have multiple platforms that you can use. But the biggest sticking point that I see with people is just they try to learn all three, and then they're also trying to manage other marketing stuff as well at the same time. And it's just too much to try to learn simultaneously. And each one has its own quirks and slightly different rules and best practices. So the wires get crossed a little bit. Whereas if you take the time to learn one well, then you can internalize those rules and understand its differences from the other platforms. And then it's much easier to layer them on top of one another. So that would be my number one suggestion. And if you're a romance author, Facebook's probably going to be your best bet. Facebook is generally going to be the cheapest option for most genres, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best. So for thrillers and psychological thrillers, mysteries, then I think probably it's a little bit more weighted towards Amazon ads, where you'll be using those more. And then for things like sci-fi, fantasy, etc., then it could go either direction. So I would explore one, maybe get your feet wet with all three, and then see what resonates, and then go from there and really try to dive deep if this is something that's going to be part of your marketing mix, which I would recommend using the ads to some extent, because it is a good way to get visibility.
A quick tangent question for anyone who feels they can answer it. We've been talking mainly about fiction. Do you see any differences in approach if you're selling nonfiction, especially through ads? Is there other considerations that come into play?
Yeah, I can answer that. I would say nonfiction is a lot easier to advertise to, is assuming you have a nonfiction book that is very clear in terms of who its target audience is. So if you're writing self-help nonfiction, it's a lot easier to advertise to that, because really when you're writing your ad, it's just a matter of figuring out what people's problems are. So I had a lot of my early success with nonfiction advertising, and I found that it was easier to learn in doing that, but that's my experience.
Excellent. All right, so let's segue into one of the alternatives to advertising that Susan brought up, which is a free first in series. And, I remember when this was the way to go. Every author was canceled to make their first in series free. Susan, you obviously think this strategy still works, and it sounds like you're still using it. I'm wondering if it works differently than before, or if it takes advertising and promotion to work. And one reason I mention this is I think I've seen, suggestions of promo stacking, where you like get a BookBub deal if you can, or you have a Kindle daily deal, or and so you're trying to maximize the fact that you have this either limited time free offer or a free first in series. Michael or Susan, either of you want to tackle this first?
I'll just jump in, like the one that said I did that to begin with. I'll defend that a little bit. Of course, it's changed. Everything changes like on the continuous. So, and when I say I use perma-free, I don't just mean I set a book free and never do anything else. Like that's just pricing. Now I have to go out and advertise that in a variety of ways. But for me, mostly it's newsletters. You could use it with the per-click advertising. You can absolutely run a Facebook ad that advertises a free book as well. So it's like advertising is separate from that. I really look at, there's two major models that are out there right now. You can be wide, which means you're on all the retailers, and you can be in KU, which means that you're exclusive to Amazon. And the illusion there is that you're not using free if you're doing KU, but you're absolutely using free if you're doing KU. You're just free to an entire subset of readers that are in the KU program because the book is free to them. And so you're using the frictionlessness of a free entree, and whether it's the first in your series, or some authors have one free book at any given time and they rotate through their catalog. There are a lot of different ways to use free as an enticement, but the idea is you're reducing the friction, you're advertising to bring eyeballs to that, get people to consume it, and then hopefully they like you and you're well aligned and you do your craft well. You're going to bring them into paying, and how much, how well you convert them is a whole separate question. But it's one that I actually am familiar with, even though I use free and I don't use the per-click ads, because the idea of, ending your book in a certain way so it carries people over, whether you're using cliffhangers, which absolutely work, even if readers complain about it, but they will absolutely click. Or if you're like trying to create something that's like binge worthy, this is sort of a new catchword of like, you want to make the Netflix model of I'm going to binge through this whole series. And so there's a certain way of writing, style of writing that goes with that, which free is a very integral part of that, because you're just sliding readers right in there. So at the same time, there are people who price full price all the time and use intermittent free, but I think there's very few people who don't use free at all, like that are wide, full priced, never discount. Most of the advertising, most of the effective advertising is on discounted books. So at some point in time, in some way, you're new to the reader, making a discounted book just makes it easier for them to try you out. And then they will pay, there 100% are people out there who will pay for books. They still exist. And having free doesn't change that. So free just, lassos them and gets them into your little corral. So go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, that's all really good stuff. I've used pretty much free in every variation you can think of. I've had a free first in series. I've done free books as part of my mailing list. I have a series, urban fantasy, going on right now where I have a free novella that Susan had mentioned. That's all really, really effective. What I would say about perma-free is that you have to make sure your house is in order before you go perma-free. So make sure that your cover is as good as it can be. Make sure that your book doesn't have typos, errors, because readers don't treat free stuff the same way they treat paid stuff. Like if you took Stephen King and made him an unknown author and went to an alternate universe and he released it as perma-free, people would beat up on it. And it's not an author thing, it's a psychological thing. So just make sure that you're putting your best foot forward as much as you can before you make something free. Because if you take a book, like if you take two comparable books, one of them is paid and one of them is not, one of them's free, the more often than not, the book that's free is probably going to have a lower star average. And again, that's not necessarily due to the quality of the book. It's just due to the mentality that when people get something for free, they're just more likely to be more critical of it. So that's something that I've had to contend with over the years. And I've always just been really conscious of, when I make something free, I'm extra careful and I'm extra deliberate in what I do make free, because I know that those 1-star reviews are going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. You're absolutely right. That absolutely happens. And I watch it. I see it happen. And you set the book free for the first time and it's like, whoosh,
Yes.
People come in. And because if you make it easy, then, somebody who only reads mysteries will now try your young adult. And they're like, hey, this is like got kids in it. And it's like, did you read the description? No, you didn't. Okay. So yes, that will happen, but also the flip side of that, I found, is one way to rack up a lot of reviews is to put it perma-free. Now, yes, you're going to have some of those are going to be those 1 stars. That comes with the territory, but hopefully, especially if you're advertising well, so you're advertising to the right people. I'm advertising in a category on Fussy Librarian that is for young adult, for example. Not putting it in romance when it's, it's got romantic elements, but it's a young adult book. That's what its target is. So advertise it well, you get a bunch of people in there, and you can get a lot of social approval via, a large number of reviews. And that's the best way that I've seen to get a lot of reviews on a book. If you had a book go viral that was just fantastic and could rack up thousands of reviews at full price, go you, do that. But that is definitely, if you're starting out, that's harder to do. And one of the ways, if you're, a new author, I would think a fast way to get a lot of feedback, but you're right, like, wait for that. Wait until you've got some positive reviews on there already and you've got your book polished and everything is like, that book is good. And then you can put it out in the wilds and let them have at it.
Yeah, because the worst thing to do is to put a book perma-free and then it get a bunch of 1-star reviews. That'll hurt it long term. So yeah, absolutely. Just make sure you're getting it to the right people and you'll do well.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the topic of social media, which was probably the second most popular area of interest. A lot of people want to know what social media site they should be using, what's the one that will absolutely work for me personally, or what is the best platform for my genre or category, and then what is the best way to gain a following on that platform. Like ads, we don't have the ability to get very technical or tactical about this, and so much of social media is, well, it depends. But we'll do what we can here to maybe cut through the noise. I'd love to hear what role what role organic, meaning not paid, social media use plays in your marketing, and how much time you devote to that. And I think a lot of this is about, engaging readers, being a good literary citizen, showing up, that sort of thing. And so how do you prioritize that in relation to the other things you might be doing that's like paid advertising? And Pamela, Would you be comfortable starting us off here since we haven't heard from you in a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I would encourage people to try all the social media, because you don't know which ones are going to resonate with you and resonate with your readers. And there's definitely advantages to all of them. So I have a presence on Pinterest, on Instagram, on Facebook. Um, I attempted TikTok. I took a class on TikTok. I'm still, jury's out on TikTok. You have to also think about your audience too, and the age of your audience. And my audience tends to be older. So what I found after trying all of them is that I'll still take a stab at TikTok. I'm on Twitter, but I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter. On Instagram, I'll put something up occasionally. But Facebook for me personally is just where I spend more of my time. And I think everybody goes through the phase when they're a brand new author where they waste a lot of time on the wrong things. And I found a lot of the wrong things on Facebook were posting in Facebook groups when I had a new release. Sometimes it'll work if it's a Facebook group that makes sense, but there's like a bunch of Facebook groups where all it is other authors posting their books and nobody's buying. So it's like it's a lot of white noise. So what I did find for me personally that worked, and I've only been doing this for about a year, is I have a reader group. And my reader group, I think it's about 6,000 readers now. So it's grown over the past year. And in all of my audiobooks, at the end of my audios, I invite them to join the reader group. That was an accident. The back matter was just left in. My narrator read it. And all of a sudden I started getting this really steady stream, because when everybody when they join my Facebook reader group, I ask them a couple of questions. I asked them if they've read any of my books, what was their favorite. I asked them who their top 3 authors are. And I asked them how they found the group. And it's fascinating to me because people find the group all different ways, but a lot of them come from that audio. And so what I've found that works, because I had another Facebook group that I did with a couple of other authors, and it never really got off the ground. We didn't post enough. We weren't connecting with the readers. We're mostly posting sales stuff like buy my book. And it kind of just fizzled. So it made me nervous to do it again, to be honest. And so I didn't even try it until about a year ago. But then I'm like, first I started with my Facebook page, and I started posting on my Facebook page more consistently and posting stuff that wasn't just buy my book. I posted, inspiration for a story. I posted about a cat, just anything relatable. And so I started building that up, and then I did the Facebook group. And now the Facebook group is phenomenal. I think it's been instrumental with my releases. I can count on that Facebook group to drive a lot of sales immediately when I put a pre-order up. I do giveaways in the Facebook group that are fun, like around release day. And I do them in a different way. I do them fun stuff that is kind of like a thank you for them. I think of the readers in my Facebook group as my friends. And so that's kind of my thinking with everything I post. I would post something as if it's something I'd share with my friend. So it's going to be, okay, you guys, I slipped on my diet. I just had chocolate for lunch, silly things like that. Or it might be, I'll run a story idea by them. I'm like, you guys, I'm thinking about doing a book set in New York City, instead of Nantucket. What do you think about that? And I'll take their feedback. They've helped me to name characters. In fact, they gave me a couple of really good names for characters. I ended up using both of them. Same with titles when I couldn't think of a title. And it gets them invested. And so they're even more excited about the book. So I have a lot of engagement in my group. Like they post stuff regularly. So I typically go every morning. I'm an early bird. I'm up usually crack of dawn. So that's usually when I'll go in there and I'll post something. I post something almost every day. And it's very rarely book related. It's usually personal. It's about what I'm reading. I talk about other authors because I read everybody. So I'll be like, oh, I just read this book. What are you guys reading? And that kind of engagement, they love that kind of thing. And then I'll check back later on in the day and, I'll respond. I'll like their posts. I probably spend maybe 1 hour a day all put together on that group between posting and going in there and liking. And that's it, 1 hour. And it pays off so much. There's days when I don't spend an hour. There's days when I just put the post up and that's it. And that's what works for me. I know there's a author, a thriller author, and she told me, which I thought was really good advice, and this is why I'm going to give TikTok another chance, because I said, I don't think my audience is there. And she said, well, she goes, I didn't think they were there for me either. She said, until I went there and I found a new audience. And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. So maybe my current audience doesn't go there, but maybe if I go there, I can reach people that do go there. And so she makes these incredible TikTok videos that are confessional ones. And I watched her first one and I'm like, I thought she was confessing to having an open marriage. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? It's like a soap opera. And then at the end she goes, and to see what's happening, read my book. I'm like, oh, she got me. And it works really well for her. And so TikTok is driving a lot of sales. Colleen Hoover, as an example. And this is where TikTok, it's not necessarily what she's doing on TikTok. It's a lot of it with her is other TikTokers that have discovered her books and talk about them. And so now her book, she's got like 4 books that are on the New York Times bestseller list from TikTok, reviving these older books. So I wouldn't rule anything out. I would try it, see what works for you, and just try and have fun with it. Okay.
Thank you, Pamela. And I know there are probably some people attending who have ruled out Facebook or have left Facebook. And I would just like to encourage folks that the same strategies that Pamela is talking about can work in other environments. Like there's Discord for reader groups that I've seen authors use successfully. So there's usually a platform workaround if you don't like one place or another. Susan or Michael, do you want to talk about social at all in your reader or audience engagement, reader engagement life?
Yeah, I'm going to offer the complete opposite counterpoint because and there's some Pamela sounds very much like a lot of especially romance writers that I know that engage, that have fun, they are successful with it. So it's like absolutely viable to do your business that way. But I'm here to tell you it's not required. Like I have a romance pending who has a Facebook account, but she's on there maybe once every 3 months and she does not engage at all with anyone. And now I actually am on Facebook as myself talking about, politics and cats and like, just me doing my thing. And so you can find me on Facebook, and I do use Facebook to coordinate with other authors. But I do not use social media to sell books at all. Like at all. And I have a successful business. So I think you have to understand the medium. You have to be comfortable with it. And if you are, and you want to put that time in and you want to try to make that work, great. I was just reading an article though, that was ironically timed from the New York Times today about how publishers, I'm sure you've seen it, Jane, about publishers are reassessing like having all these celebrities with their 6 million followers and can't, sell 10,000 books. And it's like, yeah, because those audiences aren't the same, I'm kind of like, duh, but, so again, know your audience. The romance world, there is a lot of people, readers who like to do community building online and talk about books, and they like, so that environment exists. I'm not surprised that Colleen Hoover has, new old list books that TikTokers have discovered and exploded because the TikTokers are basically talking about your book. That's great. That's probably not anything that Colleen did per se. And I don't know if she's on TikTok and they just hooked up or whatever, but, so those communities used to exist back in the day. It used to be bloggers, right? And bloggers were huge. And if you got on the right blog, you could get all this visibility. That's gone. Now TikTok is here. Fortunately, what we have now, actually, in my mind, fortunately, we have paid advertising. So you don't have to invest that time. You can go use that time to go write books if that's what you really want to do. And I think there's a lot of authors, again, who look at it and they're like, I don't want to spend a lot of time on social media. It just doesn't work for me personally. It doesn't work for my life. Is that required? And I would say, no, it's not required. But if you're all about that, I have a young friend who's she's all about that and she's into it. And she's like, I'm going to go do it. And I'm like, great, you're the right person to go make this be successful. So that's not my jam, and it is hers. So great. There's 100 ways to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say Social media it's like finding your avatar. Find the one that makes your personality shine. Like, I don't shine on Facebook, I don't shine on TikTok, but I do pretty well for myself on YouTube. And one of the things that I did for my fiction audience is that I said, okay, I want to do something for my fiction audience. I don't want to do Google Plus, which was at the time dying. I don't want to do Twitter. I'm just not really a social media guy. So I came up with this idea of doing a podcast every week for my fiction audience, where I talked about what it's like to be a part-time fiction writer while raising a family, attending law school classes in the evenings, and working a full-time job. And every week I would just turn on the microphone and I would talk to the wall about what was on my mind, what I was working on. And to my surprise, it actually did really well. And I would have never known in a million years that would have worked. And it was just something I'll try this for a few weeks and it'll be fun. And it worked really, really well. And I don't do it anymore, but it worked so well that it helped create an audience for me. And that helped me create a community of people where I could talk to them every week, by talking to my wall. And I'm more of an introvert. So that worked really, really well for me, because then people would engage with me around the stuff that I was talking about, which made it a lot easier to talk to them. And so that's a particular tip that worked for me. Might not work for you, but it's just I think a good reminder that if you can find the social media that makes your personality amplified, then you'll do a lot better. Because if you hate doing Twitter, there's no point, because it's gonna feel like drudgery. But I spend a couple hours a week on doing social media and video and that stuff, and it works well for me. But that's only because I enjoy it. So I think your enjoyment is also critical.
Can I add one thing I forgot to mention? Well, two things. You don't have to be outgoing to have a Facebook group. I was terrified to do it, and I put off doing it for years because I was so nervous. So you can do it your way. You can be just yourself and do as much or as little as you want. But one other thing that is super effective, and not many people do it, and it can be really effective, is specific reader genre groups on Facebook. So back in 2015, I launched a different pen name through a reader group, where I was in the reader group for Sweet Historical Westerns. I was in that group as a reader, enjoying the books, liking them, and then I was encouraged. I'm like, well, maybe I kind of want to write one. There was a connecting author group that went with that reader group, and through that group, I joined a promotion when I launched my book. And this is a great way to start a book. I launched my book at 99 cents as part of that promotion. There were 30 authors, and it was over a weekend, like a Friday to Tuesday sale. We did, in the Kindle Unlimited, we did the countdown days, whatever it was. So I launched at 99 cents. And what that did was that instantly put all of the exact write also bots, meaning the people that write in that genre, similar books, on my new pen names book. And that book did fantastic. That I wrote that in that genre for a couple of years. A couple of years ago, I started, just because I'm a huge mystery reader, I started a Facebook group just for myself, knowing that I was going to want to write another mystery at some point, and knowing I wanted to kind of copy the success of what happened with that group when I was ready to release my mystery. So I started mystery, thriller, and suspense reader group. And part of the key to why that reader group is so successful is we're very strict about promo. So you're not going to ever see authors throwing up sale posts. We allow them to do a new release post if they're in the original group. So what that actually means is that group is so active with people talking about books. And so when you do actually have a new release, there's people that they'll go and they'll buy it. And it's really, really cool. And that group is up to, I think it's like 13,000 readers. So there's creative things you can do like that. And that group takes me no time. I'm not even in that group much at all. That group just does its own thing. So there's things like that you can get creative and try. I'm done.
Thank you. So, we're heading towards the end of our discussion here. It went by amazingly fast. I want to bring up two questions that have been prevalent in the Q&A this afternoon. One of them has to do with audiobook promotion. And Pamela, you touched on how a call to action at the end of your audiobook was so effective. I'm sure that people's ears perked up at audiobooks in general when you mentioned that. Is there anything different about marketing and promoting audiobooks, or is it really just about making people aware that that edition exists? Does anyone have knowledge on this?
I actually do a lot with audiobooks. So what I found that works for me is I'm not exclusive to Amazon. I'm wide with audiobooks. So that lets me do promotions like Chirp with BookBub. And that's been by far kind of like a BookBub for a regular book. Chirp does the same kind of thing for audiobooks, and it can be phenomenal. The first time I did a Chirp, the most effective thing when you do a Chirp promotion is to also reduce the prices of the other books in the series. So they dropped all the prices in my series to $4.99, and that just exploded sales. And not only on outside of Audible, but also within Audible, because kind of like with the BookBub effect, if you have a Kindle Unlimited membership, which basically is like an Audible membership, even if something is 99 cents, you're still going to borrow it in Kindle Unlimited. You're usually not going to buy it. It's the same thing with audio. I was shocked at how many people, instead of getting it for like, I think it was like $1.99, instead of buying that book, they actually used their credit. So my Audible went way up. So that was really effective. But other than that, what I do is I make sure that when I have a new release with audio, I try to time it so that it comes out at the same time as the book, ideally. But if it doesn't, and it's like a week or two later, I'll do a separate post, a Facebook post. I'll boost that post. I'll email my list. But what I always do with any new release is I have a post that I put all the links everywhere. So I do large print, hardcover, audio, all the different links, different stores are in the post. So just by marketing the book itself, the audio gets marketed. So far, that's what I've done with audio.
The other question that's come up pretty frequently, Nick, did you have something to add on the audio side?
Yeah, I was just going to say that to follow up Pamela's point, I think the most important thing if you're going to market audio is to have that pricing control, which you don't get if you're exclusive to ACX. So with ACX, you can't change the price, and your book is going to retail probably for somewhere between $19.99 to $24.99. It's really difficult to run any sort of paid advertising. You can't run the Chirp deals. There's really very little you can do outside of the ACX daily deals or the variety of deals that are curated by their editors that you can run. And the only real way to drive visibility to the audio is to sell ebooks in that instance, from what I've found. So by going with Findaway or going wide with the audio, all of a sudden you have control over the pricing, and then you can sell it and use the same tactics and many of the same strategies that you would use to just sell the ebooks, because all of a sudden you can price your audio at $3.99, $4.99, $5.99 at a price point that someone who's not familiar with you as an author can take a chance on you, whereas they're probably not going to have an impulse purchase of your audio at $20 or $25. It's just a really high barrier to entry there.
Another question that's coming up frequently is the wisdom of hiring a publicist, how to do it, when to do it, should you do it. Quite often, I don't see self-published authors relying on publicists, but is there anyone here who has found them useful that would recommend hiring one? That's a lot of no's.
I'm going to say no. And an interesting thing happened. This is also relevant, I think, to per-click ads. There's a lot of authors who want to outsource things that they're not good at, or they don't have knowledge about. They would have to acquire a lot of knowledge to do well. And that's like a super great impulse. Unfortunately, it's really hard to do effectively. You are still a small business. And I was recently at a conference where some high-powered romance authors were talking about what they're doing. And I've got these 7-figure authors who they're running their own ads. And they are spending all the time to run those ads and monitor them. And they're spending like crazy amounts of money in advertising. And they tried to outsource it and they still couldn't effectively. Like they were unhappy with that and brought it back in-house. So I think to some extent, it's part of the job. is to understand publicity. If you get to the point where you can hire a publicist and that publicist is going to do well for you, it's because you already have transcended to a level where now you're getting booked on Oprah or something. And yeah, okay, you need a publicist then because they're going to be coordinating a different level of media exposure for you. But for most self-published authors, that's you're not attending this thing if you're at that level. So you don't need to worry about that yet. That's my personal take on it, and your mileage will vary.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, I'm actually at that level and I still haven't done a full-fledged publicist yet because, you know, everything that I've heard from friends that have done it is the ROI just isn't there. And if I have, you know, $5,000 or $10,000 to spend, you know, I want to spend that money where I'm going to get the most direct impact on sales, you know, and to me, you know, at some point I will use a publicist, but it's going to be for more brand awareness, long-term brand awareness. It's not going to be for immediate sales.
All right, so we're going to wrap up now with the final question, which is somewhat unfair and unanswerable, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because it encapsulates the problem that many authors face. They get paralyzed by the fact they have a limited budget, sometimes no budget. They don't know where to invest their money. They maybe have very limited experience in marketing books, maybe just a handful of books. Maybe it's their first book, so they don't know what works. They're scared of wasting their money on things that don't work. Can you offer guidance? What should they prioritize? What advice do you have for them here at the end? Let's start with Pamela.
So I think the most important thing, honestly, is to know your market. You know, I think, you know, I saw in the comments too, there were a lot of questions about also bots. And I think a lot of people don't understand what they are. And I think they're super important. And I think, you know, what an also bot is to me, basically, is you're looking at who is your book most like? And, you know, who would you want to be sitting next to the shelf on that's most likely to be similar to your book? You know, and then if you can understand that, everything else will come from it. So for me, again, that's going to be Danielle Steele. It's going to be Ellen Hildebrand, Debbie Maycomer. You know, these are people that have a similar tone, a similar type of story. And I had to laugh because earlier, like I still don't know how to use spreadsheets, you know, so don't be intimidated thinking you need to know that to get started in ads, because I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. But I'm a pen and paper person. You know, and I think what could be beneficial for a new author is go to Amazon. This is how I do my research. Take a piece of paper and take a pen, look up, you know, whoever pick 5 authors that are the ones that are most similar to you, and then go look at their also bots and write down the ASINs, write down the name of their best-selling book, you know, actually look at the inside the book. This takes a lot of time up front, but it's time well spent. I actually look inside the book. If I'm not familiar, I see a name and also bought and I'm not familiar, I open up the book and I read it. Does it have a similar style, overall feel? Is the blurb a similar kind of story? Then I'll put that on my list and I'll make a keyword ad from that or an ASIN ad. So I would say start with that, because you can use that same information when you go to Facebook and target some of the, you know, the bigger names on Facebook. And I think that's kind of where you would want to start, in my opinion.
I would say sometimes you got to follow the Tommy Pickles philosophy, which is sometimes a baby's got to do what a baby's got to do. And sometimes you don't have any money. And I was a musician and I sold every instrument I owned so I could publish my first book. And even that wasn't enough money. And so if it were me, if I had $500, knowing that the cost of everything is going up with inflation and COVID right now, cover designers are raising their rates, I would still put the money into a cover. You know, put the money into a cover, because you can always cut corners on the editing if you need to. You can always find someone at the level you can afford to help you with editing. It may not be the best, but you can at least get someone to help you with typos and things like that. To me, it's better to at least get in the playing field of your genre in terms of doing your market research, like Pam very, very wisely mentioned. Do that, get your cover right, And readers, you have to hope that they'll be a little bit more forgiving on the story front. And the good thing is that in this world, there's nothing, even if you do make a mistake, even if you publish something and you're not able to get the right level of editing that you want or that the book needs, you can always revisit it down the road when you're making more money. So don't feel like anything that you do, you're beholden to it. That's the beautiful thing about this world of publishing we're in right now, is that you can always go back and revise things as needed.
Susan?
This is all like really great advice. So do what they said. But also I would say, make sure you understand why you're in this. A lot of people feel like the only way they can be successful is if they become a full-time author that's making hundreds of thousands of dollars or a year, or whatever shiny bauble is in their head of what success means. And you're not a good author unless you hit that bar. There are plenty of authors now and throughout history who have written part-time and made a part-time living from their writing, or made no money from their writing, and they were wonderful. It's your worth is not your bank sheet, okay? And I know a lot of people would love to have their writing support them, and I think that's great, because you can write more, and that's what you love to do. But it's also okay not to do that. You know, it is also okay to just publish because you want to share your works with the world, and not burden those works with having to support you, you know, to have something else you do that supports you. And I kind of do this sort of within publishing, because I have a pen name that's very monetarily successful, and I love her works, and she writes romance, sexy romance, and it sells and it's wonderful. And I have another pen name that writes science fiction. Right now I'm writing a hope punk climate fiction series. It sells, but it doesn't sell like this, you know, and I don't burden those works with having to make money. I keep that pen name, and I keep writing under that pen name because I love it, and I have things I want to say. And I feel like those stories are really important to have out in the world right now because of the world we live in. And so there are many reasons why people publish a book, and it's okay for you to have whatever your reasons are. Don't feel like you have to compete with whatever the markers of success are that are out there. Get real okay with what you want, and then go for it. That's my advice.
And Nick, you get the last word here.
All right, no, lots of great points. So yeah, I would agree with market research, figure out what titles, covers, blurbs are resonating there, and then use those to make your packaging as good as possible. In terms of marketing, what you can do relatively inexpensively, start a newsletter. So you can do that via ConvertKit, MailerLite, MailChimp. There are a variety of services there. And then you can join cross promotions with other authors via services like BookFunnel or StoryOrigin. If you have a novella, a short story, a novelette, something that you can give away. And that's a really powerful way to start building a fan base very inexpensively. And your newsletter is going to be your second most important asset besides the books themselves, because the newsletter can't be taken away from you. Facebook, Twitter, anything like that, constantly changing. You can get caught in algorithmic shifts. Even with the ads, the platforms, you can run into problems with rising costs, suspensions, ad disapprovals, all that. But the newsletter is something that you own, and email is not going away. For any of these services, you have to sign up with your email address. So it's been a staple of the internet for a long time, and it's going to continue to be that way. So you can have a relationship and build that over 15, 20 years with someone on your email list who can be a lifelong fan. And starting to build that now is so important. And then on the organic list building side, which is just people who are joining from the front and back matter of your book, so people who are familiar with your work, one of the best ways to start building that is to offer a bonus scene or an epilogue. So that takes maybe a couple hours to write. It's 1,000 words, 2,000 words. You can generate a steady stream of subscribers, not just now, but for 10, 20 years from now. And as you get more and more books out, those little links in the back matter are bringing in subscribers. Like Pamela mentioned with her audiobooks, the same thing applies with the Kindle edition, with the paperback. If you have those links in there and those push points where people can be directed toward your website to sign up for the newsletter, then those start to accumulate. So at the beginning, it seems kind of pointless, but then you start to see after 3 books, after 5 books, after 10 books that it builds and builds and builds. And then all of a sudden you're getting 10 subscribers a day, 20 subscribers a day. So it's really powerful. And this is a long game. It's probably not going to pay off in 6 months, but in 5 years with 10 books or 20 books or however many you've written at that point, then you really start to see that compounding effect. So I would recommend getting the newsletter up and running as soon as possible, even if it's only you and your mom on it, to start sending that out. It's really important to get in that habit and start building that.
I think that's a very inspiring note to end on, given that I think most writers are going to be producing more books over a long period of time. And a lot of good marketing is about patience to see these things grow. Patience is a virtue, especially with newsletter list building. Okay, so we've reached the end. Thank you all for joining us here today. We are going to be compiling a resource list, especially to give you some background information on some of the more technical bits of what we've discussed here today. So all of us will be sharing books, articles, and resources that we like and suggest to delve deeper into these areas. And also, I know that Authors Guild will be preparing a recording of this session. So if some of those terms went whizzing by quickly, you can go back and revisit the conversation. So I'm going to turn things back over to Johnny to take us out.
Thank you all so much. This was such a wealth of information. Thank you for being so generous with your expertise, and thanks to our audience for joining us. Yes, we'll be sending out the recording and helpful resources and links so you can follow up. And if you have any requests for future programming, you can always email us at support@authorsguild.org. And it really helps to hear what you want us to cover in the future. Thanks very much. And we have one webinar on Thursday on diversifying your income as a writer, which might be helpful as well. And keep in touch. Thank you, Jane, Pamela, Michael, Sue, and Nick. Thank you all. Have a good day.